I have to admit, I wasn't particularly excited about the latest offering from Disney Content Productions, Indiana Jones and the Uncanny Valley, but any curiosity about a new adventure story that might have existed has fully dissipated since I learned about a central element of the plot. It turns out this Dial of Destiny is a time travel device, and unfortunately it's the worst and most popular kind there is. I want to make a video about this soon, but I've always said that whodunits are one of the hardest film genres to plot for. But if there were one form that beats it out, it would surely be time travel. This is a story element which is often directly reliant on the intricacy of the plot being airtight, so it's no wonder that these films often fail narratively. Plotting cause and effect in a story that involves going back on those events again and again from different angles, often changing or undoing those events with multiple versions of the same characters and complicated cause and effect chains, can be a monumental task. That's probably why most movies, including this most recent offering from Harrison Ford, don't even bother. Here comes the closed loop or predestination time travel paradox to the rescue. Some films try to do time travel where you can change the past, either with branching universes, which by the way is the only one that actually makes a good deal of sense, altering the future within a single timeline, or some wishy-washy variation of this like in Back to the Future or Looper, where changing in the past sort of mystically and slowly changes your future until you put something back as it should be. Very much more fable-like interpretation of time travel than anything technically sound.
I don't want to talk about time travel shit. I'm gonna be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws.
But all of these, even the latter, can be a lot of work for a writer looking for a quick way to make audience go, wow, so smart. So closed loop it is. A closed loop time travel system is one where history is already set, and though you can travel back in time, you only act out the events as they already happened, and thus time proceeds as it always did. What's wrong with that, you ask? Well, firstly, it doesn't make sense. It's obvious at a glance why. Fair warning, I'm going to spoil a bunch of shows and movies that use this trope now, and I don't think I need to specify ahead which ones I'm spoiling, because, spoilers, this trope is literally always exactly the same.
Let's go back in a time machine! Time machine! Time machine!
For an easy example, let's take Futurama. Now in this case, it doesn't really bother me that much, and that's because Futurama is a silly comedy that is frequently nonsensical and lampshades itself about this. The time travel plot is not meant, at least in this episode, to be taken terribly seriously. And the writers of the episode use this to poke fun at the whole concept of what is known as a grandfather paradox. Anyway, in this episode, after going back in time, Fry realizes that he needs to make sure that his grandfather has sex with his grandmother so that he can exist. In the process, he kills his grandfather by accident, but then ends up having sex with his own grandmother, which means he actually is his own grandfather. He was always his own grandfather, which means he always went back in time and became him. The episode pokes fun at the idea of the grandfather paradox, in which if you go back in time and kill your own grandfather, you can't exist, so you can't go back in time, so nobody would be able to kill their own grandfather, so your grandfather would still be able to father your dad, and so on. The episode creates a humorous solution to the paradox, wherein Fry simply turns out to be his own granddad, not the guy he thought it was, who apparently turned out to be just a gay guy who never had kids despite apparently sharing his name and presumably genetics. But if we think about it realistically and not through the lens of a funny cartoon, why would his grandfather share at least his phenotypical traits if he's not actually related to him? There's no in-universe reason for this guy to look similar, except that it works for the fraudulent paternity aspect. It also means that Fry's genetic makeup literally came out of nowhere. It also doesn't solve the paradox, just presents a way in which it could be solved in this particular case. What if Fry were infertile before he went back in time? He couldn't have become his own grandfather. What if he had killed his grandmother instead? The plot, really the universe, would have to somehow actively tailor events to work out just as they always had. What if you actually went back in time with a good plan to change history? What if you got in a time machine at your home and went back in time to the same place 2 days ago and blew up your entire town while you knew you were there with a nuclear bomb, including the time machine you were building?
Oh, dear God, no!
How does that paradox get resolved? Your nuclear bomb just randomly fails to explode and you get hit by a car before you can enact a backup plan? And this is all somehow kept from the past version of you that's building the time machine? This implies a sort of conscious acting force in the universe, forcing things to work out a particular way, which is why it just can't work. Going back to Fry's genetics, this also means they are literally conjured out of nowhere. He spawned his own genes from his genes. This is a complex system which has no source anywhere in the universe, simply created through the paradox. It violates cause and effect fundamentally. There's actually a movie that takes this to bizarre extremes, which some of you might know what I'm talking about. It's called Predestination. Through a bunch of time travel contrivances, the main character is born as a woman, has a baby, then turns out to somehow have functional male genitalia that were completely concealed and get brought out through surgery, then goes back in time, dates him/herself, has the baby with him/herself, and that baby is also him/her. Now, needless to say, this particular form of intersex or hermaphroditism in humans does not exist, nothing close to it. But I don't have an issue with a science fiction film having variations on human beings that are fictional. The issue here is that there is no evolutionary, biological, or physical reason that this person exists in the universe. They aren't really a human at all. They're not part of the animal kingdom. They share no genetic ancestry with any living being in the universe. They are completely self-begotten, manifest from the void without rhyme or reason. At a glance, most people's reaction to this is, wow, that's so smart. But why? That's literally every single story with this trope. Why does this nonsense always get a pass when other obvious plot holes do not? Because that's all it is, it's a plot hole. Because the concept doesn't make sense. And why is this plot hole considered so mind-blowing and genius when it's literally just the same thing? The person was a hermaphrodite who gave birth to themselves because they went back in time and inseminated themselves, causing them to be born, and then they needed to go back in time so that they could inseminate themselves so that they could be born. It happened because 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 it happened. This is the same in all closed-loop time travel stories, and for that matter, all true prophecy stories, which are essentially the same thing but through a different lens, where the time travel is not by someone physically moving from the future to the past, but information moving from the future to the past, thus shaping the future to be the way that it was. Arrival, by the way, is the same. The big exciting twist is that aliens taught humans their language because they saw the future and saw that they needed to do so in order to receive their visions of them doing so. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry sees someone use a stag Patronus, thinks it's his dad, then goes back in time and realizes he has to create a stag Patronus so that he sees the stag Patronus and realizes he has to make it. Again, happened because it happened because it happened because it happened. In the Series 5 finale of Doctor Who, he's trapped in the Pandorica with no way out, so his future self lets him out, so then he knows he needs to go back in time and let himself out. It happened because it happened because it happened. It's all the fucking same. It's not smart, it's not new, it's not inventive storytelling, it's the same thing every single time. This example is a great way to bring up what the other big issue with this is. I think a lot of us can forgive something which doesn't make sense scientifically or even logically if it's in favor of a good story. I've even defended the way Looper's inconsistent time travel system is nonetheless used successfully as a metaphor for cyclical violence and breaking the chain. It's still flawed, but it works on a character level. Here's the thing. This form of time travel is utterly destructive to the story for the same reason that it doesn't make logical sense. It removes cause and effect, which in a narrative context means it removes character choice and agency. As a young, naive, late teen watching Series 5 of Doctor Who, I was quite anxious to see how the Doctor would get himself out of this mess with being trapped in a seemingly inescapable prison. Maybe we'd discover that he had already built a plan that was only hinted at before, that would change our view of the character and his situation, and impress us with its tactical brilliance and ingenuity. Well, we were sorely mistaken. It turns out none of that was necessary because he came from the future to let himself out from the outside. And how did he know to do that? Because he remembers that it happened. You cannot imagine how unbelievably let down by this I was. It's probably where my hatred of this stupid trope began. Blink is the highest rated episode of Doctor Who on IMDb, and as a kid I loved it, but if I look back, it's tarred with the same brush. Ultimately, the characters' choices, decisions, values, concerns, desires, they're all just not relevant to the resolution of the story. And it gets you thinking, why can't they just employ this to solve literally any problem? Well, they can. Anytime your character is stuck in a seemingly unsolvable problem, just have a closed-loop time paradox appear out of the ether to save them. It's so goddamn lazy, it's so empty, and it just kills all meaningful dramatic tension. It's the ultimate Deus Ex Machina, literally the mind of the author reaching in and deforming the story so that the characters don't need to do anything of their own agency. Their own actions and choices are entirely inconsequential. As a matter of fact, why doesn't this just happen every single time it would be useful? Or in fact, literally all the time, including situations where it wouldn't be useful. It's not like there's an inciting incident that causes it, it's just fate apparently, so why does it happen sometime but not others? Just thinking about this is making me feel lousy about the art of writing. If you're a writer and you're thinking of putting time travel in your story, please just don't do it like this. If I'm to give a positive prescription for how to do time travel in which your story is both logically and emotionally effective, the butterfly effect / branching timelines model is my suggestion. It still allows for crazy time travel shenanigans and twists and turns, as when it was used to great effect in the movie Primer, which honestly I'm still a little critical of, but it's mostly excellent in this respect. It also won't logically contradict itself if done correctly and with planning and forethought. It opens up a lot of interesting plot and concept potential, with multiple timelines, duplicates, and the need to either eliminate or organize them, etc. But most importantly, it will allow your characters to stand on their own choices, to have agency, to have meaning and consequence in the decisions that they make. And in this respect, it keeps true to the fundamental principles of story. In short, my message is this: if you want to write good time travel, don't do predestination and don't half-ass it.